What is your story about having a horrible gut feeling about a person or situation that turned out to be dead on? Story 1. I was 18 and had just moved into my own apartment. The complex was managed by the owner's son, and right from the start, he seemed off to me. Nothing I could specifically describe, but I felt uncomfortable around him. Since he was frequently at the complex for one reason or another, I kept my door locked and chained whenever I was home, and I would literally run away if I saw him outside just to avoid talking to him. Well, one day I grabbed the local paper, and on the front page was this guy's face. He had fallen in love with a previous tenant and had harassed her and her boyfriend, then continued to stalk her after she moved away. She was a grade school teacher, and he waited outside the school for her, then fatally harmed her in front of the school kids before turning the weapon on himself. Story 2. I was at a party once at an apartment complex that's known for having questionable tenants. I only knew a few people there, so I just stuck with one of my friends. Halfway through the party, a girl, I'll call her Sally, I had met a few months earlier at a job, showed up with two guys who just seemed really sketchy, pushing substances, giving Sally tons of alcohol, even though she was underage, and no one really knew who had invited them. By 11 p.m., Sally was in terrible shape. My friend and I left to get more drinks and came back an hour later. Sally was on the floor in a back room, convulsing and foaming at the mouth. Her friends who she came with refused to let me take her to the bathroom or help her vomit. Chaos broke out. I left. While walking back to my friend's apartment, I called emergency services because I knew something was seriously wrong with her. The EMT showed up and took her to the hospital. 2 days later, she messaged me on Facebook to say the doctors had found multiple substances in her system that she hadn't chosen to take. She suspected her friends but wasn't sure. I'm absolutely certain it was them. 6 months later, a news article was posted. One of the shady guys had been arrested for running an underage trafficking operation from a nearby hotel. So basically, the second I saw those guys show up with Sally, I knew something was wrong. And I was right. Those guys were dangerous people. Story 3. My mother, around 9 or 10 years old at the time, was eating dinner with her family when someone knocked at the front door. Her dad, my grandfather, got up to answer and found a salesman at the door. My grandfather politely declined whatever product he was selling and whatever speech he was planning to give, since they were having a family dinner. The salesman was very aggressive in trying to continue speaking and even tried to invite himself inside the house. At that point, my usually level-headed grandfather got upset and said something along the lines of, "You need to leave now." Finally, the salesman gave up and went to the next house. But not before my grandfather called the neighbors to warn them. The young female neighbor answered the phone and said she was home alone. So my grandfather told her not to answer the door under any circumstances. Fast forward a few months, and the salesman turned out to be a serial criminal targeting young women who were home alone, posing as a door-to-door salesman. To sum it up, my grandfather may very well have saved his neighbor's life. It always reminds me to trust my gut when I get a bad feeling. Story 4. I gave birth in November to a baby girl who had a very rare neurological disorder. She hardly moved at all in utero, but when I told my doctors, they all said that every pregnancy and baby is different, etc. I have a healthy son. So I tried to let go of my worries. We had a completely normal pregnancy, totally normal tests, no indication of trouble. Then she was born. The second she opened her eyes for the first time, I got a horrible sinking feeling in my gut. There was no presence behind her eyes. We were still in the delivery room. There were pictures taken, and in every one, I look wary, scared. There were immediate problems. She didn't latch, she had no reflexes, etc., etc., etc. I shoved all my worries down. She was born a few weeks early. Everyone kept saying, "Bottle feed her, and she'll perk up once she gets closer to her due date." Every nurse, every doctor, every lactation consultant. We were released from the hospital with a healthy baby. Nope, nope, nope. A week later, we were back in the NICU because she was still lethargic. She wasn't eating. It turns out she had essentially no brain activity the entire time. I didn't want to know, but I knew. I knew the moment I looked in her eyes. Story 5. There was a knock on the shared front door. The house was divided into 3 flats, and I lived on the ground floor. I recognized the guy at the door as the boyfriend of the pretty young woman who lived a couple of floors above us. He smiled at me and asked if he could come in and wait for her in the hallway. He was a nice-looking man, white, very upper middle class with a tweed jacket and a posh accent. Good manners, charming smile. But my stomach flipped and I said no and shut the door in his face very abruptly. I had no idea why I reacted as strongly as I did because I knew him enough to say hi, and I knew he stayed over at the building a lot. A couple of days later, I saw her with her face swollen and purple from where he had physically assaulted her. Apparently, she had been in the hospital for a few days. She stopped me in the hallway and said that if I ever saw her boyfriend again, I was to call the police. I'm guessing I subconsciously picked up on some nonverbal cue from when I'd seen them together. Story 6. Years ago, I was in another state due to a family member being hospitalized. The hospital was very close to a rundown and sketchy area, and my family and I had stopped to get gas. This guy in a hoodie walked up while I was pumping gas, looking kind of out of it, and asked me for coffee money. I had a very bad feeling about him, and not wanting to upset him, I carefully gave him a bit of change I had in my pocket, explaining that I wasn't carrying any cash on me, all the while watching him and my surroundings to make sure I could leave or act if necessary. He thanked me and went on his way. A few days later, once I was back home, I saw his face on the news. He had been arrested for harming multiple women and leaving their bodies in nearby abandoned houses. Story 7. So a couple of years ago, I used to work out a lot at this gym a couple of miles from my house. There was this personal trainer who worked there, and we would occasionally chat about fitness, working out, etc. while passing time in the sauna. Well, one day, I finished a workout and went into the locker room, then opened the door to the sauna. There was the personal trainer guy acting out this horrifically violent shadowboxing routine. It was steamy in the sauna, so it took him a second longer than normal to realize I had just walked in. He stopped abruptly, as if to avoid embarrassment. I thought he was just goofing off or something, but then I saw this insane look in his eye, like he had just finished fighting in a war with Spartans. Seriously, his face looked crazy. I always thought he was a little unhinged after that. Anyway, a couple of months later, the guy was arrested for taking home someone he had met online, harming her, and burying the body in the woods. So yeah, I guess unhinged he really was. Story 8. My sister had a boyfriend 10 years older than her. I didn't have a problem with the age gap, even though the fact that he had his first child when my sister was 13 kind of weirded me out. Age doesn't matter as much when you're adults, right? They weren't dating long, but she intentionally got pregnant 6 months into the relationship. I was really excited to meet him during a family trip, seeing as he's the father of my niece. Upon meeting him, I got a strange vibe and found myself anxious at the idea of being alone with him. He didn't do or say anything strange, though, and generally seemed like a nice guy. Still, when it was just me and him, I felt incredibly tense, like he might try something awful at any moment. I stayed at my sister's place for a few days, then went home to the next province over. He added me on Facebook, and then I got a message saying he thought I was super cute and wanted to get together. He literally tried to cheat on my sister with me. He tried to cheat on my sister who was 6 months pregnant. I didn't reply. I just took a screenshot of the message and sent it to my sister and my mom, asking my mom to look out for my sister since her boyfriend was not to be trusted. After some issues, my sister is now a single mother. Story 9. There was actually a girl I grew up with who was loosely part of my larger social circle, and she always kind of creeped me out. I had even brought this up with some closer, male friends, and they seemed to agree. If you ask me why, I honestly can't even explain it. She was a bit ditzy, but very friendly and overall nice. Never said a bad thing about anyone or got caught up in drama. But it was like she was missing some human component. Anyway, we lost touch after high school, but a few years later she had a kid, and a few years after that, she was sent to prison for years for doing something similar to Munchausen by proxy. She was poisoning her kid, and the doctors caught on, thankfully. Luckily, the child survived and is now with the father, who by all accounts is a decent person. I've told this story before, and it's really frustrating because I can't articulate anything specific about her that gave me the creeps. But there it is. Storytime. My ex. She would constantly tell me things that seemed like they could be true, with just enough details to make them believable, but were also exaggerated just enough to make her seem more important or unique in the situation. It always felt a little off, but she had the benefit of plausible deniability on her side. Example. One morning I was waking up for work and she told me there had been a huge screaming match at the neighbor's house, where the two parents were fighting and making a scene. Her role in the story was that she took their kids somewhere else while it was going on to keep them safe. The police were called and the man was escorted away. Since I hadn't heard any of this, she told me, "Yeah, you were out like a rock," which was possible. But it was all a fabrication, just a story to make herself seem interesting and heroic. Turns out she was a pathological liar, and almost none of those things were true. My gut knew, but my brain talked me out of believing it. Story 11. With my second baby, I had to have a C-section due to some medical issues, and having one with my first baby. For days leading up to the date I was scheduled for the C-section, my anxiety kept building. I tried to talk myself down and told myself it was just normal anxiety. I reasoned that I was just stressed because I already had a toddler and was about to have a new baby. I was worried about money and came up with every reason to justify how worried I was. When the day came, I was in full-on panic attack mode. I told my husband that I knew something bad was going to happen, and I had an overwhelming sense of dread that one of us, either the baby or I, wouldn't make it out of the OR. I sat down on the morning of my delivery and wrote messages to all of my family members telling them how much I loved them and giving instructions in case I didn't come home. I called my sisters and parents and subtly said my I love yous and goodbyes. I wasn't finished by the afternoon when we were supposed to leave, and it almost made us late for the appointment. We got to the hospital in time, and I was prepped for surgery. We went to the OR and things just kept going wrong. First, the anesthesiologist couldn't get the epidural in the right place. It took half an hour and about 15 plus jabs with the needle before he got it right. When I was finally numb, I got very nauseous and couldn't focus on anything. They were supposed to go get my husband before they started, but they forgot, and I wasn't totally alert at that point and didn't realize they had already started. They stopped when they realized and someone went to get him so they could continue. In the meantime, I was just lying there with a large incision wide open on the operating table. When my husband arrived, they continued, and it was only about 2 minutes later that my daughter was born. They had some trouble getting her out because the umbilical cord was wrapped around her neck multiple times. You know how in movies there's always that intense second after a birth where you wait to hear the baby cry? It was just like that, except she didn't cry. No sound came. They took her to the table and my husband went with her. The respiratory therapist was talking through clearing her airway, and she still didn't cry. About a minute later, all I could hear was panic in the voices of the nurses and other staff. Apparently, there was no oxygen connected for the baby, and they all rushed out of the room. After that, it was just my 2 doctors and the anesthesiologist left. I cried silently to myself, wondering what was going to happen. They closed me up and brought me to recovery, where I found out that she finally did breathe but had a lot of fluid in her lungs. They were waiting to see her condition before she could leave the nursery. They told me, in an hour she can come down, then another hour, then 4. Eventually they said she had to be life-flighted to the nearest level 5 NICU. I saw her, covered in tubes in the incubator, for about 2 minutes when they stopped in my room on the way to the helicopter. I left the hospital as soon as I could feel my legs again, against the doctor's advice. But I wanted to be with my girl. By the miracles of modern medicine, antibiotics, tons of oxygen, and amazing hospital staff, my girl made a full recovery. She was very tiny, and it turned out the dating on my ultrasounds was off. She was born somewhere between 35 and 36 weeks, and her lungs weren't fully ready. Going in, I felt something wasn't right, and I should have listened to that feeling. If it weren't for the incredible medical care we had access to, she wouldn't have survived. I thank my lucky stars every day that we are so privileged to have had that care. She is now a crazy, sassy, healthy, intelligent, beautiful, and stubborn little lady, and I am thankful for her every day. Story 12. My best friend's family was visiting. My best friend and her dad had asked to see the new fossils I'd added to my collection, so I went upstairs to get them. Her dad was allergic to my guinea pig, who lived in my room. As I turned the corner, I noticed my younger brother, who I call Sean online, was wearing his pajamas. It was barely 9 p.m. Sean never went to bed that early. I asked him why he'd changed. Sean told me that he felt really sick, and Dad had told him to go to bed and see if he felt better in the morning. Sean didn't look that sick, but something just felt off. I asked if Mom knew he didn't feel good. He said no, he just talked to Dad. That wasn't okay, and not because Mom would have been upset if nobody told her. Something about it felt more serious. Mom had to know Sean was sick. I started to panic a bit and snapped at Sean that he should never trust Dad's medical advice. Dad just tells people to sleep earlier and exercise more. Sean needed to tell Mom now. Sean clearly thought I was overreacting. Honestly, I thought I might be too. But he went downstairs and told Mom. The first thing Mom did, like always, was check him for rashes. He had a red streak running from his thumb up to his armpit. Sean had severe blood poisoning. We found out later from the hospital that he was about 4 hours away from death. If I hadn't had such a strong feeling that Sean needed to tell Mom, he wouldn't be alive today. He would have passed away in his sleep that night. Story 13. My parents like to help people who honestly don't deserve the opportunity. You can't save people from themselves. They hired this farmhand who I knew was shady the first time I laid eyes on him. He had just gotten out of jail and was addicted to meth. They gave this guy full access to the farm truck, their tools, and all of their equipment. My stepdad was dying of cancer at the time, and the farmhand promised he would maintain the farm after my dad passed. Tools and equipment had been disappearing for months before my dad's death, but afterward, the thefts increased rapidly. The day we called him out, my husband went through a few boxes my dad had asked us to inventory before he died. A lot was missing: silver coins, a pocket watch, and other valuables. When the farmhand returned, he proudly announced that the chainsaw had mysteriously vanished from the bed of the farm truck while he was at the gas station. When we confronted him about the missing items, he admitted that he took them to protect them. His mother later called us to say that whatever he hadn't sold was hidden underneath her house. Good riddance. He was a terrible person. It takes a special kind of cruelty to steal from the dead. Story 14. Not exactly a horrible situation, so maybe this doesn't count, but it was finals time, and I was studying intensely for statistics, which I had that day, and Spanish, which was the next day. I usually locked myself in the office and studied there. Well, I felt really antsy and had a strong gut feeling to go to campus. I lived 20 minutes away, which I normally wouldn't do, especially since I had 3 hours until my statistics test. Still, I decided to go and ended up studying in the cafeteria. I took a break from statistics and started working on Spanish. Suddenly, this guy I had never spoken to, though he was in my Spanish class, walked up to my table and asked if I was ready for the test. We started talking about Spanish, and I found out the teacher had changed the test day and sent an email about it that I hadn't seen. The test was in 30 minutes. It's weird to think about how many little things had to happen for me to make it to that Spanish test, all starting with that gut feeling. Story 15. One night I was out walking my dog on the same route we walked every night. I lived in a residential part of a major city, narrow streets, 25 miles per hour speed limit, and stop signs at practically every intersection. It was dusk and unusually foggy, which muffled the normal city noise and made everything feel a little eerie. We reached an intersection that was a four-way stop. I looked both ways and saw nothing coming, so I went to step into the crosswalk. Immediately, I got a chill down my spine and pulled my dog back onto the sidewalk. I quickly looked again, and for the block or two, I could see through the fog and darkness. There was still nothing visible. No headlights, no noise. I hesitated one more second, feeling really silly and paranoid, when a car suddenly zoomed out of the fog. It was going incredibly fast, had no headlights on, and blew straight through the stop sign. It disappeared into the fog, but seconds later I heard a loud crash. The car had collided with an SUV 3 blocks away after running another stop sign. The car was completely destroyed. I called 911, and police and ambulances arrived quickly. Thankfully, it was a large SUV, so the people inside were mostly okay. The driver of the speeding car was taken away in an ambulance. I later heard that he survived, but had been under the influence and was estimated to be driving over 60 miles per hour in a 25 miles per hour zone. If he had hit my dog and me, which he almost certainly would have if I had kept crossing, we likely would not have survived. Story 16. A few weeks before graduation, I was visiting my best friend at her school. We were outside a rundown college bar when this tall, good-looking athletic guy started talking to us. Right off the bat, I disliked him. I had this awful feeling about him immediately. Something about him felt slimy, dishonest, and like he was trying too hard. My friend, who was seeing someone else at the time, seemed charmed by him. I have a bad habit of judging strangers too quickly, so she probably didn't think twice about my negative comments after he walked away. And anyway, graduation was only weeks away. We figured we'd never see the guy again. Fast forward a year. My friend moved to my city and we shared a house together, something we'd planned since childhood. Things were great. Eventually, her relationship ended, and within a week, the guy from the college bar, let's call him Chad, sent her flowers and a cookie cake, just being a nice guy after her breakup. I thought it was creepy, overreaching, and filled with ulterior motives. I told her as much, but she thought it was sweet. Eventually, they started dating, even though he lived 4 hours away. I tried to get to know Chad when he visited, but he was aloof, too cool for me, and clearly only interested in my friend. He would even show up with his entire family, again, from 4 hours away, without any notice. My friend didn't want to hear my concerns. She thought I was being judgmental and trying to control her dating life. Maybe I was, but I couldn't stand this man. When our lease ended, Chad moved to town to live with her. My friend and I drifted apart, and we only saw each other when he was around. I invited her to my birthday dinner, and she insisted Chad come too. When I said I didn't want that, especially since it was an all-girls dinner, communication broke down completely. It became clear she chose him over our friendship. I gave up trying. For over a year, we didn't speak, even though they lived a few blocks away. I'd occasionally drive by to make sure everything seemed okay, but I could never tell. She was working 4 jobs, pulling crazy hours, while Chad worked part-time, if at all. From what I could gather, he spent most of his time fishing on a boat my friend claimed he bought, though I had my doubts. She slowly withdrew from every social circle not connected to him. She deleted most of her social media. It made me sick with worry. I knew he was controlling who she saw, what she did, who her friends were, and likely taking financial advantage of her. I feared he was abusive in other ways too. After a few years, she left. He had continually threatened her, and she finally had enough. It was hard, and I still feel guilty for not doing more, either to convince her or to stay in touch. But over the past year, we've been able to rebuild our friendship, which started when we were kids. I'm grateful it didn't last longer, especially since they had talked about getting married. Story 17. I lived in a trailer park that was surrounded by hedges. There was a gap in the hedges with a gate that residents used to get in and out, and this gate was very close to my trailer. I was about 12 or 13, sitting under a tree near the exterior side of the gate. I had forgotten the key to my trailer and was waiting for my mom to get home. It was a nice day, so I tried to make the most of it. After being out there for a while, I saw 2 older teens or young adults about 50 yards away on the sidewalk, heading in my direction. They seemed to be looking at me, though nothing overtly threatening. Still, after a few moments of watching them, I decided I should head into the trailer park. As I was walking through the gate, I heard, "Kid, stop!" I bolted through the gate. With no trailer to run into, I had little protection. But a neighbor owned a pickup truck, so I quickly jumped into the back of it and laid down as fast and quietly as I could. Moments later, I heard the 2 individuals come crashing through the gate. They mumbled about where I went, but it sounded like they gave up quickly and left. I stayed hidden for about 20 minutes until I heard the sound of my mom's car approaching. Its messed up motor mounts gave it a distinctive sound. Not as dramatic as some other stories here, but I always wondered what those 2 older people wanted with someone my age. Story 18. I'll try to make this as quick as possible. Back when I was casually dating my current partner as friends with benefits, there was a girl in his friend group who gave me seriously bad vibes, despite being really friendly to me on the surface. Over time, I had a gut feeling she was attracted to him, but it didn't bother me, since he's an attractive guy, and that happens. Until she managed to move into the empty room in his house when someone moved out. She spent a year and a half doing little passive-aggressive things like making backhanded compliments, telling me she admired how little effort I put into looking good, or inviting me over for smoothies only to say, "Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot you were allergic to pineapple and put pineapple in it." She also made plans with the group to do things I had been suggesting, but only when I couldn't come. I loved the carnival and asked everyone to go for a solid week. She was the one saying no every time. Then while I was working, I saw a selfie of her with my partner and 3 other friends at the carnival. All of that was petty, but it got worse. My partner eventually told me about something that happened when we were still casually dating. One night, she came to his house after drinking, claiming she was locked out of hers. She asked to sleep in his bed and started kissing him almost immediately. They fooled around, but he told her he didn't have protection to get out of the situation. She begged him to go further anyway. Another time, also during our casual dating phase, he confided in her that he felt things between us were getting serious too fast. Of course, she jumped on the opportunity to convince him to end it with me. At the time, I was recovering from a violent assault and undergoing chemo for ovarian cancer. 2 big reasons I wasn't ready for a relationship. She used those reasons to claim I was pushing for something more serious, and she scared him into thinking I wanted more than I actually did. Thankfully, he ignored her advice and talked to me instead. I was able to explain clearly that I wasn't in the mindset for a serious relationship yet. Story 19. When I was 15, my mom started dating a guy who gave me total creeper vibes. At first, it was really subtle. Sometimes they'd both pick me up from school, and even though he was the one driving, he would constantly look back at me, asking questions and trying to engage me in conversation. One time we were at IKEA because I needed a new bed, and he offered to use his truck to bring it back to our house. IKEA is a 45-minute to 1-hour drive from where we lived. After we loaded the bed into his truck, he asked if I wanted to ride with him instead of going with my mom. My gut said no, but I didn't want to be rude, so I agreed. During the car ride, he started talking about how he had a house in Costa Rica that he visited all the time. He said he would take me, but only when I turned 18. I felt really scared. He could have driven off with me right then. I later told my mom how I felt about him and what he said during the ride. She admitted that she thought he was a little off too. She looked him up on Megan's Law, a California registry, and found out he had 2 convictions for inappropriate conduct with minors under 14. She immediately cut off all contact with him, and thankfully, he never bothered us again. My mom thinks he may have hurt his own children because every time she asked about them, he would get weird and avoid the topic. Story 20. I went to school with a kid, I'll call him T, for several years. He always creeped me out. He stared at the girls in class just a little too much. He had angry outbursts a little too often. He frequently played the race card. If a teacher gave him detention for hitting someone, it's because I'm black, isn't it? If he was reprimanded for talking in class, clearly because I'm black. You get the idea. He was constantly fighting, constantly in trouble. Girls made complaints about him often. The school did very little to keep him away from others. We graduated a few years ago. Then a few months back, I saw his name in the paper. He went to a high school party and brought a weapon he had stolen from a family member. He held it to the head of a drunk 16-year-old girl and assaulted her. Then he hit her so badly that her face was covered in injuries. He later met up with 2 friends, also kids I knew from school, and the 3 of them tried to assault another underage girl. A male friend of hers saw them taking her upstairs and went to help. The girl got away. He did not. T and his friends dragged the guy outside and attacked him. Then T handed the weapon to one of the other boys, we'll call him B, who taunted the victim and then used it to take his life. The 3 of them jumped into T's car, dismantled the weapon, and buried the parts in different places. They then bought some drugs, got high, and went around town breaking into cars. The police caught them 2 days later. T is currently awaiting sentencing. B is also awaiting sentencing. The 3rd friend took a plea deal and will serve 5 years in exchange for a full confession. T and B are only 20 years old and have thrown their lives away. The 3rd was 19. The victim they killed was only 21 and wasn't even from our town. He and the girl they tried to harm were only visiting friends who attended the party. The 16-year-old survivor is reportedly recovering and, I imagine, getting counseling. TB and the 3rd individual tried to claim the victim they killed was the actual attacker and that they were doing the right thing. But both girls told the truth. B never seemed that bad, but T, we all knew one day he'd do something like this. I hope they never get out. Story 21. I was out on a canoe with my godparents one summer. I was maybe 9 or 10 at the time. Anyway, I looked behind us, around my godfather who was rowing at the back of the boat, and saw something floating in the water. All of a sudden, I got this feeling that it was something important, and I told them we had to go back to check what it was. Both my godparents on either end of the canoe looked back, saw nothing, and told me to let it go, that it was just driftwood and not worth our time. After spending a good 2 minutes panicking and insisting we turn back, they finally gave in and turned the boat around. As we got closer to the floating object, my godmother said, "Insert Godfather's name? You won't believe this," and pulled out my godfather's wallet. Turns out it had fallen out of his pocket and into the water. We found his ID and some cash floating nearby as well. He didn't even remember bringing it with him and still thanks me to this day. Story 22. There was this girl who was just friends with my boyfriend at the time. Right away, my gut was telling me something was going on. And to be fair, I still believe my boyfriend really did just see her as a friend at first. But that naivety faded quickly when she confirmed her feelings for him. She literally messaged him saying, "I like you more than a friend. I know you have a girlfriend, but do you feel the same?" He insisted nothing was going on, but she would constantly try to freeze me out of conversations, invite him to watch movies, and then give me a dirty look when he asked if I could come, and message him constantly. He would just ignore me and text her. He even forgot dates we had planned and took her on the exact same one. It wasn't anything extravagant, just something personal to us. A local coffee shop where we'd sit in the same seats and hang out. One time I said I'd meet him there in the afternoon, and when I arrived he was already there, with her in our seats. This kept happening more and more. When I tried to express how I felt, he said I was being crazy and controlling for not trusting her. It was infuriating because I genuinely started to think I was just being paranoid. A few weeks later, he dumped me. Since we were in the same friend group, we tried to keep things civil and remain friends. That was working okay for the first 2 weeks. And because he wanted to be a good guy, he let me know that he was now with her. He told me they had been together for just over a week. So basically, he waited less than a week to get with her after dumping me, and still insisted that he didn't have feelings for her while we were together. Story 23. At my small private high school, every student had a designated advisor, a member of the staff meant to be your advocate, confidant, and academic counselor. We had group meetings with our advisors every 2 weeks, and many advisors held one-on-one meetings every week or two. My advisor didn't require one-on-one meetings. Instead, she had an open-door policy that many students took advantage of regularly. She was a beloved teacher at the school, known for having favorites, one of which was my best friend. She was also openly gay, with a wife and child. At the time, I was a 14-year-old girl struggling with my own sexuality and desperately looking for role models of happy, healthy LGBTQ plus adulthood. But literally the first time I met her, something in me said, "Nope, not her." I wasn't afraid of her. I just had a gut feeling that I shouldn't get close. I only met with her one-on-one about once a semester for 4 years, and every time I got in and out as quickly as possible. Everyone told me how lucky I was to have her as an advisor, but we had absolutely no personal connection. I only ever spoke to her about course selection. When the news first broke, no details had circulated among the alumni gossip yet, but I believed it immediately. Eventually, the full story came out. She retired, got divorced, and was eventually charged. She served around 8 months in prison. Story 24. This didn't happen to me specifically, but to my husband. A friend of ours from high school and I both joined the Navy. We got roughly the same job and were stationed at the same location. I married my husband exactly a year before that friend married a woman he met in training. Upon meeting her, my husband immediately said, "Something is off about her." Starved for female company, I defended her, especially because it seemed like we had so many shared interests. Fast forward about a year, and everything hit the fan. She cheated on him, ran up 5 figures of credit card debt, and was spreading lies and talking badly about anyone who didn't stand up for her, including me. Things settled down after about 4 months, and I told my husband that for the sake of our friendship with her husband, his best friend, we needed to just deal with her. At that point, I had gotten out of the Navy, and we were living in a really unsafe apartment. Our daughter wasn't even 2 yet, and I was pregnant, so we wanted out fast. The only option was to move into a house owned by my mother-in-law with that same friend and his wife. Our instincts were screaming not to do it, but we felt unsafe, so we moved in. At first, things were fine, some petty issues, but mostly okay. Then out of nowhere, around the 6.5-month mark, the wife disappeared for about a week. Internally, my husband and I hoped our friend had finally ended things with her. But after a week, my husband found out where she went. She had been placed in a psychiatric facility, claiming she wanted to harm herself because of us. She said we were abusive, didn't care about her happiness, and more dramatic accusations. That's when everything started coming to light. She had been saying terrible things about me behind my back, claiming I didn't deserve my children and that I was a terrible mother. She said my husband was a horrible person and even claimed that his mother considered her more of a child than him. To make it worse, my husband told me that our high school friend, the one we had been trying to protect and support, had actually tried to assault a friend of mine. That's why she didn't come around anymore. Story 25. I either always had a good gut instinct when it came to avoiding terrible situations, or I had a guardian angel looking out for me when I was younger, because I missed some really bad ones. I made a lot of stupid decisions back then, mostly involving bad company, substances, and alcohol. Thankfully, I've moved far past that part of my life now, but I definitely had some close calls before giving up partying. The biggest incident where my gut saved me was a bit strange, and to this day, I still think there was something psychic about it. One of the most reckless, I can't emphasize that enough, things I used to do with my friends was drive around town while drinking, specifically around this one lake surrounded by wooded areas. One night I had a dream that I was in a car with the two friends I normally did this with, driving around the lake just like we always did. We turned a curve and suddenly a deer was standing in the road. The friend driving swerved, misjudged the distance, and ended up driving us down a hill and into a tree. I woke up instantly with my heart racing. Most of my dreams fade from memory as the day goes on, but this one stuck with me and left me in a weird mood. I told my roommate about it, who was in the dream and usually joined us on these rides, and we decided not to go out like that anymore. Talking about it made us realize just how dangerous what we were doing really was. Later that evening, the friend who usually drove called and asked if we wanted to go out. We told him we were staying in for the night. He said okay and hung up. We didn't hear from him for about 2 months. We figured he was mad that we didn't want to hang out, but honestly, we were fine with it. Then one day my roommate got a call from him. He explained why he hadn't been in touch. Apparently, he had decided to go out drinking by himself that night, even though we didn't join him. He said he was driving along our usual route around the lake when a herd of deer came out of nowhere. It startled him, he swerved, and ended up crashing into a tree. He had minor injuries, totaled his car, and lost his license. Or had it suspended. I can't remember. When my roommate told me what he said, she looked completely shocked. She then told him about my dream from that night. We were all a little freaked out. After that, I promised myself I would never get into a car with a drunk driver again, and that I would always listen to my gut and even my dreams. Story 26. A couple of months ago, my girlfriend said she was stopping by her brother's house to grab some shatter and then going to see her best friend. Forgot to mention she was in my car. She said, "I love you," gave me a kiss, and headed out. As she left, I just had this uneasy feeling. Rewind a bit. About a month before this, her brother's best friend Scott, whom I didn't know, got her a job, drove her to work here and there, and would also pick her up to go hang out at her brother's place. It was more involvement than I liked. I voiced my concerns and was reassured that he was just a good guy trying to help out. Okay, fair enough. I'd do the same for a friend. Back to the day she left, I'm sitting there thinking, something is off. I did something I never thought I'd do. I grabbed her iPad and checked her messages, and unfortunately, I was right. She had asked her best friend to lie to me about where she was going and even added a LOL after the message. She was actually going to Scott's place to hang out. I had already told her I didn't think Scott's intentions were purely friendly. She had insisted they were just friends. I messaged her and told her to come home. She lied again, saying she was with her best friend. So I told her I knew what was going on. She came home and we talked. We agreed to work on things. Things started to improve, but as always, there's a but. I got another uneasy feeling, and once again, I checked the messages. She was having an emotional affair with this guy who was trying to convince her that I was putting up walls and making all kinds of excuses. I sat her down again. We talked. She said she didn't know what to do and that she had feelings for two people, so I left. I had helped her through depression and anxiety. She didn't work for over a year, and I did everything to support her. I even put myself into debt trying to make her happy. And this was how I got treated. It was ridiculous. I felt bad for checking her messages, but I'm also glad I did. Otherwise, I would have been taken advantage of for even longer. Lesson learned. Always follow your gut instinct. Story 27. Compared to a lot of the stories here, mine is pretty tame, but it fits, so here goes. A few years back, I was delivering pizza part-time to help pay off some debt. I was like the cool uncle to most of the younger kids working there. One day, a new guy started working at the shop. Everyone thought he was pretty cool. I met him, shook his hand, and instantly felt something off. He gave me a slimy vibe. I told the manager that night that there was something strange about the new guy, and to be careful. The manager was 15 years younger than me and just kind of dismissed it, saying we should give him a chance. Two things happened that proved me right. The first was when we were the only two drivers on shift. I had been working both of my jobs for 3 straight days, basically from 8 a.m. to 1 a.m. It was slow that night, and the manager said one of us could go home. I volunteered. The new guy begged me to stay, saying he felt sick and thought he might throw up. I agreed to stay. 10 minutes before closing, he showed up with 2 friends and wanted us to go drinking with them. The second thing was 2 weeks later, when I found out he had been fired. Apparently, he had been changing the tips on credit card receipts, things like turning a 1 into a 4. He made the mistake of doing it to a customer who ordered the same thing every Wednesday for 3 years and always tipped the same amount. That guy checked his online banking regularly and caught the discrepancy. The company investigated and discovered that in just 2 months, the new guy had managed to steal over $300 using that method. Story 28. In the late 90s and early 2000s, my family lived in a condo in California. My dad was stationed at a nearby Marine base and would often be gone for a week or 2 at a time for training. The landlord, Tom, was super friendly and had an amazing garden. My mom talked to him about how I was feeling homesick and missing my grandmother's garden, and he offered to let me help out with his plants and spend as much time there as I wanted. The first day was fine. I was so impressed with all the cool plants that I hardly even noticed Tom. After a few visits, I started to feel a little uncomfortable. He just seemed a bit off to me, paid a little too much attention, lingered his hand on my shoulder a fraction of a second too long, smiled a little too eagerly. Nothing concrete, but enough to creep me out. I was hesitant to keep going back, but I was fascinated by his garden. I loved the little gardening apron and tools just my size. Loved that I was allowed to dig for worms wherever I wanted, and that almost every plant was edible. One day Tom came over and invited me to play in the garden when my mom wasn't around to give permission. I knew she was in the shower and that I shouldn't go anywhere without telling her, but Tom insisted it would be okay. I went anyway. When we got to the garden, Tom said he wanted to take some pictures of me with the plants. Everything seemed innocent. He never asked me to take my clothes off or anything like that. But when my mom came running out in a panic because she didn't know where I had gone and saw him with the camera, I was never allowed to go back. Fast forward a month. My dad was gone on one of his 2-week trainings, and it was just me and my mom at home. I slept with my mom when my dad wasn't there. One night, my mom woke me up and whispered that we were going to hide under the bed and that I had to be very quiet. Someone had broken into the house. Whoever it was left quickly after the police were called. They had come in through a locked door, messed up my room, and left. A few days later, Tom was arrested. He had used his key to get into the house and apparently had planned to take me. Story 29. This girl in my class had an older brother. He was about 2 or 3 years older than us, I think. I'll call him Jimmy for the sake of this story. Something about him bothered me. He just seemed off and very angry. He genuinely scared me, so I made it a point to stay on his good side or avoid him altogether. His sister scared me a bit too, but to a lesser extent. That's a whole other story though. One day during gym class my freshman year, I accidentally hit him square in the face with a ball. Not hard enough for a nosebleed, but still pretty hard. He screamed and cursed at me like an angry toddler before storming out of the room. I panicked and hid behind a few of the bigger senior guys because I honestly thought he was going to hit me. He was much bigger than me. I wouldn't have stood a chance. Fast forward a few years, and my town had a string of arson fires. The arsonists started with nuisance fires and eventually burned down a historical building. During all of that chaos, Jimmy tried to kill someone by setting their house on fire. It was a drug deal gone wrong, and he tried to burn the guy who had crossed him. He almost killed an innocent, blind elderly man in the process. Everyone made it out alive, but the house was a total loss. When I heard Jimmy was the one responsible, my first thought was literally, why am I not surprised? He's still serving time. Story 30. At my best friend's wedding, my polite and non-confrontational partner almost completely lost his composure at a guy and his friends. We didn't know them, when one of them kept bothering me to dance. I don't think the guy realized I had a boyfriend, so I didn't see the big deal. I was pretty upset that my partner almost caused a scene and asked what was wrong with him and why he overreacted. He said he just had a bad feeling about them and that something came over him when the one guy wouldn't leave me alone. Fast forward a couple of hours and we realize a young woman is missing. It was an outdoor wedding with lots of trees and trails, and it was pitch black everywhere except the reception area. A few friends, my partner and I realized no one had seen her in at least an hour. When we did find her, one of the sketchy guy's sketchy friends was practically dragging her out from behind some bushes. She was completely incapacitated, even though she hadn't had that much to drink, and he wasn't intoxicated at all. Rumors started going around about the bartender serving special drinks. It was a nightmare. We got her out of there and convinced her to go to the hospital because the whole thing felt incredibly wrong. She didn't want to pursue anything further because the bride and groom had no idea what had happened, and she didn't want it to ruin their wedding. She just wanted to focus on healing. We all supported her decision, and we were just relieved she got help. It still breaks my heart when I think about it. Story 31. My dad was a drug addict my entire life. As the oldest child, I had no problem calling him out, asking where he was, why he was working late, etc. This past May, he relapsed for the millionth time, and I refused to speak to him. I went to visit my boyfriend's family out of state and hadn't spoken to my dad in about 2 weeks. That Saturday night, while in another state, I sat straight up in bed out of a dead sleep. And the first thing that popped into my mind was that my dad was gone. I woke up my boyfriend and told him, but he said it was probably just a bad dream and to try to go back to sleep. The next morning, I still had this overwhelming feeling of dread that I couldn't shake. I told my boyfriend I wanted to go home early, and he agreed. By this point, I had tried to reach my dad on the phone multiple times with no response, which was typical during his relapses. Not even 45 minutes into our 4-hour drive, I got a call from my mom. She also hadn't been able to reach my dad and was panicking. He was out of town, working a job in another city. We kept trying to get in touch with him. Eventually, my mom called the police to do a wellness check at his hotel. I was right. He had passed away from a heart attack the night before. The same night I sat up in bed with that feeling that something was wrong. That feeling still haunts me. I carry guilt for not speaking to him in the 2 weeks before he died. I'm now in grief counseling, trying to work through the emotions that come with growing up with an addict parent. Story 32. My mom's ex-husband, when she first brought him around, everyone seemed to love him. He was extremely charming and acted like he genuinely cared about us. My mom was in a really vulnerable position. She had just lost her nursing license and was trying to support 3 kids on a minimum wage job, which was all she could get at the time. He came in and started paying all our bills, and everyone thought it was so generous of him. But I knew it was all too good to be true. He would get frustrated with me because I wasn't as affectionate with him or didn't tell him I loved him like my brother and sister did. But I just couldn't get myself to do it, no matter how hard I tried. I would get sick to my stomach and my head would start to hurt every time he brought it up, or I tried to force myself to say it. As time went on, he turned out to be a horrible man. He manipulated everyone in my family, isolated us, and was extremely verbally, emotionally, and physically abusive. It took my mom a while to leave him, and when she did, he financially ruined her. I'll never forget when my mom sat me down several years after we left. She told me I had been right about him and that I should always, always, always trust my gut, and so should the people around me. Story 33. After their youngest child moved out, my mother-in-law and father-in-law decided to deal with empty nest syndrome by taking in a foreign exchange student from Germany who was studying at the local college. They grew very close to this girl and often referred to her as our German daughter. She ended up living with them for 2 years before returning to Germany, but she continued to visit, and my FIL would see her during his frequent business trips overseas. A few years into this, their youngest had a wedding. We traveled down, we lived several states away, and were picked up at the airport not by Mael or Sil, but by Fael and the German daughter. I immediately got a vibe of very strong intimacy between the two of them, like an afterglow just radiating off them. My first thought was, oh no, they're sleeping together. I gently brought it up to my husband, but he scoffed and said I was imagining drama. The entire time we were there, I kept noticing little signs confirming my suspicion, but I didn't say anything more. It was clear the thought deeply upset my husband. Flash forward a little over a year later. Phil goes to Germany on a business trip and calls Mal to tell her he's been having an affair with the German daughter since she moved in during college and is thinking of divorcing and starting a new life in Germany. I'm not sure what happened exactly, but eventually he came back. Emil took him back, and they stayed together until he died from cancer about 15 years later. I never forgave him for what he put his family through. For those 15 years after everything came out, I was nothing more than coolly polite to him. Story 34. My parents divorced when I was a teen, and it hit my mom pretty hard, on top of what was already a very difficult upbringing. That's why, as frustrated as I get with some of her choices, I understand where she's coming from. I may not like the train wrecks, and I know I can't save her from herself, but I get it. So, a few years after the divorce, I'm in my early 20s and she meets this guy. She's head over heels. After a short dating period, she brings him over for me and my sister to meet. I immediately get a bad vibe. He's overly affectionate, overly charming, and overly trying to connect with me. He talks about how amazing his business is going, how he travels all the time, name drops celebrities he supposedly knows. The more he talks, the more my internal alarms go off. Still, I figured Mom is an adult. As long as she verifies everything, I'll trust her. Big mistake. Time goes by, and I start noticing that he's never around for holidays, and sometimes he's gone on business trips for long stretches. When Mom brings up the subject of marriage, I ask basic questions like, where is this guy from? Where's his family? Why is he always gone? She has no answers. One day I'm watching a show about bigamists who have multiple wives in different cities and scam people with insurance and tax fraud. I start asking my mom a few questions. Bingo. He's asked her about all those same things. So I reach out to my uncle who works in insurance and ask him to see if one of his PI contacts can run a check. Boom. The guy has multiple IDs and a full family in Washington, D.C., and we're in Texas. I confronted my mom, and she was heartbroken. I told the guy to get lost. Turns out 2 of his exes had died under accidental circumstances, and he had life insurance policies on them. He was never formally investigated, but I got the feeling he was a predator. I wish I could say that was the last time Mom made a mistake like that, but no. 25 years later, the last guy she lived with turned out to be using a fake name and was arrested on a felony burglary warrant. Story 35. There was a guy in my college orientation class who was obnoxious, dressed in all black and very loud. My first thought was, I hope I don't end up being that guy's friend. It's not a thought I have often. A few weeks in, he started sitting beside me and chatting with me during breaks. We became friends. A month or 2 went by, and he switched out of his apartment into mine since there was an opening. It was college housing. It was okay at first, but he kept making a mess on my side of our shared bedroom. My bed was always covered in his art tools for some reason. I eventually just gave him the room and started sleeping in the living room. That January, I came down with the flu for the first time in my life. My couch, coffee table, and a small area between the couch and wall were all I used while I was sick. But when inspection time came, the entire house was a mess. I was blamed by this roommate, who then blasted his music throughout the house and threatened me with violence when I asked him to turn it down. I was still very sick with the flu at that time. Luckily, my other roommates knew what was going on and were there to help me out. I moved out a few days after that. Story 36. My mother lived in Afghanistan up until sometime in the 1980s, when the family moved to Pakistan. Before that, she, her 6 siblings, and her parents lived in a house in Kabul. During the Soviet invasion, as communist ideologies were, attempting to be, spread throughout the country, soldiers would routinely perform random raids of homes owned by people who worked for the government, looking to incriminate them for books they deemed illegal or anti-communist. My grandfather worked in a government office doing financial and accounting duties. He was also an avid reader, a trait passed down to his eldest son, who read everything and was interested in politics. One night, they were awoken by loud banging at the door. Everyone inside immediately knew who it was and why they were there. My mom, knowing her older brother had a lot of books, immediately rushed to his room and found a book she didn't quite understand, but had a bad feeling about. She was fairly young at the time, maybe 12 or 13. She hid the book in her nightdress. When they opened the door and the soldiers barged in, they ravaged the house looking for any literature, documents, or evidence that could justify taking my grandfather, and potentially everyone else in the home, away. But they found nothing. Later, after the Soviets had left, my mom realized that the book she had hidden in her nightdress was a political novel that was very anti-communist. Her quick thinking and brave decision likely saved her entire family. Story 37. During college, I studied abroad and was in Dubrovnik, Croatia. We had been told it was safe to walk around alone, which was reassuring after spending time in less safe places. So one day I went out, earphones in, just walking around town and taking in the sights. I found a stairway that led down the side of a cliff-like area to the ocean and decided to explore. Toward the bottom, there was a sign on the ground that said private. I looked down the steps and saw people fishing, but figured I'd just stop short and sit on a large rock nearby to do some journaling. This is where things got creepy. As I sat there, people passed by now and then, nothing unusual. Then this guy came down the steps, and I immediately got a bad feeling about him. He continued past me down to another set of stairs and out of view. About 5 minutes later, he came back up and sat at the top of the steps, just staring out at the ocean. Something felt off. He stayed there, occasionally glancing back at me, for what felt like forever. 10 minutes, then 20, then 30. I started running through plans in my head, counting the steps, planning my route, figuring how loudly I could scream if something happened. Eventually, it had been around 45 minutes, and the sun was starting to set. No one had walked past during that time, but I knew there were still people farther down fishing. I had also managed to sneak a photo of him with my camera, just in case someone found it later. Finally, I decided it was time to leave. As soon as I started packing my things, he perked up and began watching me more closely. Panic set in. I told myself that if someone walked by, I'd run. If not, I'd run anyway. Luckily, a woman and her young son came up from the fishing area. I let them get almost to the top of the first flight of stairs and then bolted. As soon as I got up, the man did too and came after me. I've never run so fast in my life. I could feel him behind me. I passed the woman and her son and ran up the second flight of stairs. At the top, I sprinted down the street, searching for a store or someone, anyone, to help. That's when I saw one of my professors and his wife. I begged them to walk with me. I was in full panic mode. That's also when I noticed the man again, now on a motorcycle, slowly driving down the street looking for me. He circled around multiple times, watching us. The professor and his wife walked me back to the ship we were staying on and through security to be safe. The man followed us the whole way back, driving past us repeatedly. It was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. Story 38. When I was living in Berlin for a while, I was walking home alone around 1 a.m. after a night at the club Berghain. I was walking up this street where the first quarter had a cafe with people hanging out inside, but the rest was completely empty. I became creeped out by a van parked a little ways off near the cafe area, but I told myself I was overreacting and walked past it. When I was about a third of the way up the street, I saw the van drive by. No big deal. But then it stopped and parked a bit ahead of me. Something felt very off. I turned around and walked back toward the cafe, so I was within sight of the people inside. When I got there, I saw the van drive by again and return to its original parking spot. The caveman part of my brain was practically screaming now. I had no one to call, no weapon, and there was no safe side street to escape through. After a couple of minutes, I saw a couple walking by and asked if I could walk behind them until I reached a busier area. I did just that and never saw the van again. Nothing happened, so I can't say for sure that I was in danger, but my gut was screaming the second I saw that van. I've also been followed by a van once before, in a suburban area in broad daylight back in the US. I was walking alone when a van passed by. No big deal again. But then it started slowing down, and my adrenaline spiked instantly. I decided to be safe rather than sorry, and started moving fast. By the time I was close to the house where I was staying, my mom's friend's place, I was practically running. The van was following closely. I slammed the doorbell, and the van parked across the street.